There's a thing that happens to you when you work somewhere long enough. You stop seeing it. Not the way the blind stop seeing. Not all at once, not with any grief attached to it. Just slowly. The way paint fades on a door you open every single day, until one morning you cannot remember if it was ever any other color. That's what happened to Daniel Ashworth. 31 years. That's how long he'd been employed by the royal household. Not as a guard. He'd done that stretch early, 7 years in the scarlet tunic with a bearskin hat, baking in summer and freezing in winter outside the iron gates while tourists shoved cameras through the bars like feeding time at a zoo. After that came the interior postings. Footman. Then senior footman. Then a strange middle management title that nobody outside the palace fully understood, but which meant essentially that Daniel knew where everything was and how everything worked and was trusted not to drop anything that had been made before 1700. He was 54 years old. He had a flat in Pimlico, a daughter in Edinburgh who called him every Sunday, and a lower back that had filed formal complaints against the marble floors of the palace every winter for the past decade. He had never, in 31 years, walked through the front entrance as a visitor. He'd never bought a ticket. He'd never stood in the queue. He had never, and this landed on him one Tuesday morning in October with the specific weight of something that had been true for a very long time, and had simply been waiting for him to notice he had never seen the palace from the inside as a visitor would. It started with Marcus. Marcus was his daughter Priya's boyfriend, newly arrived from Bangalore, and he was the kind of man who approached London the way a child approaches a new box of toys, with complete, unguarded wonder that Daniel found both touching and faintly exhausting. Everything was extraordinary to Marcus. The two map, the chips, the fact that pigeons simply did not move for you. They just stood there, making you go around them like they owned the pavement, which Daniel supposed in a way they did. Marcus had been in London 11 days when he called Daniel. Uncle Daniel. He called everyone uncle. It was a habit. I am thinking of going to Buckingham Palace this Saturday. The staterooms are still open, yes? Would you like to come? Daniel had been in the middle of ironing a shirt. He set the iron down. The staterooms, he said. Yes. I looked it up. There are paintings, chandeliers, the throne room. Very beautiful photos online. I thought since you work there, I'll work there. Daniel said yes. Then, maybe you can tell me which parts are worth seeing. Or even come with me. Daniel picked the iron back up. Sit down again. I'll think about it, he said. He thought about it for the rest of the week. The thinking was not pleasant. It kept catching him at inconvenient moments. In the break room, spooning instant coffee into a mug while someone else complained about the new Rhoda. On the bus home, staring at his own reflection in the dark window. In the bath, which was the worst place for this kind of thinking because there was nothing else to do in the bath. Absolutely nothing. You were trapped with your own thoughts like a man in a small warm cell. He'd walked through the blue drawing room 400 times, maybe more. He knew which floorboard creaked near the left side of the fireplace. He knew the smell of the place in summer. Old wood and cut flowers and something faintly metallic that nobody had ever been able to explain to his satisfaction. He'd supervised the arrangement of furniture, overseen the polishing of silver that had been polished so many times over so many centuries that Daniel sometimes thought the hallmarks must be wearing thin by now, rubbed soft by all that attention. He knew the palace the way you know your own hands. And yet, he'd never stood in the throne room doorway and felt his breath catch. He'd never rounded a corner into the picture gallery and been stopped by a Rembrandt the way visitors were sometimes stopped, genuinely stopped, mid-step, as though their legs had received a message from their eyes, and the message said wait. He'd seen people do that. He'd watched them. Tourists from Japan and tourists from Texas, teenagers being dragged along by parents, middle-aged couples consulting audio guides, small children who couldn't have cared less about the Rembrandt, but were very interested in their own reflections in the parquet floor. He'd watched all of it with the professional, mild tolerance of a man who is working while others are playing. Had he ever played? Not here, not once. Saturday came gray and cool, the way October Saturdays in London tend to come, as though the sky can't quite commit to anything dramatic and is settled on a sort of atmospheric shrug. Daniel met Marcus at the Victoria Memorial at 10 in the morning, which was where Marcus had suggested they meet because Marcus had read that this was where the best photographs were taken. Marcus was taking photographs already naturally of the memorial of the palace gates, of a pigeon that had landed on his arm with complete pigeon indifference to the fact that it was standing on a human being. He was 28 years old and delighted by everything, and Daniel found that this particular morning, he did not find this exhausting at all. "Uncle Daniel," Marcus waved. "You came." "I said I would think about it," Daniel said. "I thought about it. And here I am." Marcus grinned. It was the kind of grin that involved his whole face. "I bought the tickets online. Skipped the queue. Very efficient." Daniel looked at the queue. It wound along the side of the palace in the cold morning air, a long rope of people in coats and scarves, clutching coffee cups and guidebooks, breath coming out in small white clouds. Families, couples, a school group being managed by a teacher who looked like she was running on 3 hours of sleep and sheer institutional obligation. He'd walked past this queue every working day for years. He'd walked past it and through the staff entrance without a second glance. He looked at it now. These people had come from somewhere. Every one of them. They'd booked the train or the flight. They'd planned the day. They'd set an alarm. They'd chosen this over something else. They were here because they had decided deliberately that this was worth it. He'd been here 31 years, and it had never occurred to him to decide anything. "Shall we go in?" Marcus said. Daniel straightened his coat. "Yes," he said. "Let's go in." The entrance was not the entrance he used. This was obvious, and yet standing at it felt strange in a way Daniel had not prepared for. The visitor entrance. He'd seen it from a distance. He'd understood abstractly that it existed, but he'd never been on this side of it. Never been part of the flow of people shuffling forward through the security point, emptying pockets, lifting bags, moving through the way water moves through a narrow point. He put his watch in the tray. The security officer looked at him. Daniel looked back. She didn't recognize him. Why would she? She was from a different department. She saw thousands of faces a day, and he was just another face in a coat, 54, graying at the temples, holding his watch in a plastic tray like everyone else. "Anything in your pockets, sir?" "No," he said. "Nothing." He walked through. The first room. The first room was the one where visitors transitioned from outside to in, still adjusting to the light, still pulling off scarves, still making the small recalibrations of people who had just come in from the cold. It smelled familiar, that old wood and faint metal smell, and Daniel almost said something to Marcus about it, almost said, "I've always wondered what causes that smell," and then stopped himself because that was not what visitors said. Visitors did not have the luxury of having always wondered. Visitors were experiencing it for the first time, and the first time was its own country with its own rules. He tried. He tried to see it for the first time. The ceiling. He looked up at it the way Marcus was looking up at it. Head tilted back, phone raised. The ceiling was extraordinary. He knew this in the abstract the way you know that Mount Everest is tall. You know it, the number is in your head, but you haven't felt it in your legs. The ceiling was extraordinary, and he had looked at it approximately never, because when you are working, you look at what needs to be looked at, and ceilings are not in that category. He stood there in the middle of the entrance and looked at the ceiling. A family of 4 walked around him. He didn't move. Marcus appeared at his elbow. "Beautiful, yes?" Marcus said. "Yes," Daniel said. And then, because honesty ambushed him, "I've never noticed it before." Marcus looked at him. "But you work here." "Yes." "And you have never noticed the ceiling." "I've been looking at the floor," Daniel said. "For 31 years, I've been looking at the floor." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then, "What's wrong with the floor?" Daniel looked down. The floor was extraordinary too. He'd known it intellectually. He'd overseen its maintenance. He'd knelt on it once, personally, to inspect a scratch that someone's trolley had left near the east corridor, and he'd been annoyed about the scratch. Just the scratch, nothing else about the floor, not its color or its pattern, or the fact that somewhere in this building there was a ledger that recorded when this particular floor had been laid, and who had laid it, and what it had cost in a currency that no longer existed. He felt, standing there, that he had been doing something for 31 years that could not quite be called living. Not here. He lived elsewhere, in his flat in Pimlico, with Priya's Sunday calls with the lower back and the instant coffee and the bus window and his own reflection. He lived elsewhere, and he worked here, and somewhere in the arithmetic of that he had missed something. Had missed the fact that this place, this specific place, was extraordinary. Had been extraordinary the whole time. Had not waited for him. It had simply continued being extraordinary without him. The chandelier in the next room caught the morning light. Daniel Ashworth, 54 years old, 31 years of service, walked toward it like a man walking toward a thing he had always meant to see. There was a room Daniel had never entered. This was not technically possible. He was a senior footman. He had access to all of the staterooms. He had keys to all of the staterooms, a fact which had always felt like a form of wealth that he didn't spend, because spending it would require wanting something. And yet, the throne room. He'd been near it, down its corridor, past its door. He directed foot traffic outside it during a function. He'd coordinated with the housekeeping team about a spillage near its entrance. He'd done all the peripheral things a man in his position did around the throne room without ever going inside it when it wasn't in use for something official. On those official occasions, state dinners, investitures, formal ceremonies, he'd been inside it in the way a stage manager is inside a theater. Not as audience, as infrastructure. He'd never simply walked in. He hadn't known this until Marcus stopped outside the throne room door and said, "Can you believe people actually sit in those?" And Daniel said, without thinking, "I've never been in here like this before." Marcus turned. "Like what?" "Like nothing is happening," Daniel said. "Like it's just a room." It was not just a room. He understood this the moment he stepped across the threshold. Not because anything surprised him physically. He knew the dimensions, he knew the color of the canopy, he knew the positioning of the thrones down to the inch, but because the room without an event in it had a quality he'd never encountered in it. A stillness. Not emptiness. Not absence. Something more like held breath, like a room that had witnessed so much ceremony that it had retained some residue of it. The way old churches hold cold, even in summer. He stood in the doorway, and Marcus went ahead, phone up, turning slowly in a circle. The other visitors moved through quietly. There was something about this room that quieted people. He'd noticed this before, but from outside, he'd heard the volume drop when tour groups approached. He'd attributed it to good crowd management. He attributed it to nothing now. The room did it. The room earned it. There were two women near the back wall, both older, one with a guidebook, reading something aloud to the other in a low voice. There was a young man crouching to get an angle on the thrones, patient and precise with his phone, like a photographer who knows the shot is worth waiting for. There was a child sitting on the floor near the entrance, not the thrones, the floor, drawing something in a sketchbook, apparently indifferent to the grandeur, or perhaps absorbing it in the only way children know how. Daniel watched the child. The child looked up, met his eyes, looked back down, and kept drawing. No recognition. No difference. No awareness that the man standing in the doorway had spent the better part of a career maintaining the room the child was sitting in. Just a child drawing in a room on a floor that Daniel had overseen the cleaning of more times than he could number. He felt something that took him a moment to identify. Gratitude. Not for the recognition he hadn't received, for the lack of it. Marcus came back, showed Daniel the photos on his phone. "Look at this one," Marcus said. He'd caught the canopy in the light, the gold catching, and throwing it in a way that looked almost theatrical, almost too perfect, like a set that's been deliberately overdone and somehow works anyway. "I'm going to send this to my mother. She won't believe I was actually here." "It's a good photograph," Daniel said. "Uncle Daniel." Marcus put the phone down. "Are you all right? You've gone very quiet." "I'm thinking." "About what?" Daniel looked at the thrones. He'd seen them 10,000 times. He was seeing them now. "About how long I've been walking past things," he said. Marcus considered this. He was not, Daniel had noticed, a young man who felt the need to fill silences. He let the silence sit. Then he said, "My father is the same. He spent 20 years in a factory making components for motorcycles. He never rode one. Not once. Did he regret it? He bought one after he retired," Marcus said. "He's 62. He wears a helmet, and he goes very slowly, and my mother shouts at him every time he leaves the house." Daniel laughed. It came out louder than he'd intended. One of the older women with the guidebook glanced over. "He's happy, though," Daniel said. "Delirious," Marcus said. "Absolute menace on the road. Completely happy." They moved through the staterooms in the order the tour prescribed. Daniel kept stopping. He stopped in the picture gallery for 3.5 minutes in front of a Rembrandt that he had walked past. He estimated somewhere in the region of 4,000 times. The painting was a portrait of a man in a dark coat. The man had a face that had been rendered with a specific kind of attention that makes you feel the painter must have loved the subject, or at least found them intensely worth looking at. The paint was thick in certain places. You could see where the brush had moved. For 1,000 times. "You look like you're making up for something," Marcus said, appearing beside him. "I am," Daniel said. He didn't look away from the painting. "What's his name?" Marcus asked, peering at the placard. "The man in the painting? It's a study. Unknown subject. 1650s, probably." Daniel had read this off a document once, years ago, during an inventory. Nobody knows who he was. But someone thought he was worth painting. "Rembrandt did," Daniel said. "Yes. Good enough," Marcus said. The state dining room was the one that undid him, and he hadn't expected it. He'd expected if anything was going to undo him, that it would be the throne room or the picture gallery or the white drawing room with its hidden door built into the mirror paneling, which was the sort of thing that made visitors audibly gasp, and which Daniel had spent so long knowing about that he'd forgotten it was the kind of thing that made people gasp. But it was the dining room. Specifically, it was the table. The table was set, as it was always set during the summer opening, for a formal dinner. Places for many guests. Crystal. Silver. The kind of arrangement that took a team 2 days to achieve, and which Daniel had overseen, supervised, or been adjacent to the achieving of dozens of times. He'd looked at it as a problem to be solved, as a logistical exercise, as a checklist. He looked at it now and thought about everyone who had sat at it. Not the famous ones, not the heads of state or the prime ministers or the foreign royalty. The others, the lower-ranking officials, the lady-in-waiting's husband, uncomfortable in a collar 2 sizes too formal. The minor diplomat eating the fish course and try not to look like he was counting the forks. The aide who'd had too much wine by the 3rd course and had said something unfortunate and had spent the next 20 years hoping everyone had forgotten. Real people, at this table, having a real time of it. He thought, "I've spent 31 years making sure this table was perfect for people I never thought about as people." He didn't say this to Marcus. Some things you keep. There was an older man on the tour who reminded Daniel of his father. This was not accurate. Daniel's father had been a short man with a beard, and this man was tall and clean-shaven, but something about the way he moved, carefully with his hands slightly out at his sides, as though the floor might shift, recalled his father in a way that landed in Daniel's chest with the specific weight of specific absence. His father had died 12 years ago. His father had never been inside this palace. His father had been a bus driver, and then a retired bus driver, and then, at the end, a man in a hospital bed who had held Daniel's hand and talked about a holiday in Portugal they'd taken when Daniel was 8 years old, the sand and the salt and the yellow light, the way it had all seemed at 8 like the whole world was that beach. Daniel's father had never seen the inside of the palace, and Daniel had been inside it every working day for 31 years and had seen nothing. This was the thought that lived under all the other thoughts, the subterranean current running through the whole day, the thing with no name that he was carrying around through the staterooms alongside the audio guide, and Marcus's running commentary, and the particular October light coming through the windows. He'd had access to something extraordinary. He'd looked at the floor. Marcus bought a tea towel in the gift shop. "For my mother," he explained, examining it with great seriousness. "She collects them. From everywhere." "A tea towel," Daniel said. "She has one from the Vatican, one from the Kremlin." "How?" "I do not know. She won't explain it." "One from a Sydney opera house." Marcus turned the tea towel over, inspected the back. "She'll be very pleased." "Does she use them?" "No," Marcus said. "They're in a drawer. She just knows they exist." Daniel bought one, too. He wasn't sure why. He stood at the counter and looked at the range, The Union Jack ones, the Royal Cipher ones, the ones with the palace pictured on them in a stylized illustration. And he picked one with the palace on it. The whole front facade, the gates, the flags, the Victoria Memorial just visible in the frame, the whole arrangement that he had walked past every working day for 31 years without stopping to think. I work inside that. That is a remarkable thing. Who is that for? Marcus asked. Priya, Daniel said, which was true. He'd give it to Priya. He'd tell her he went as a visitor, and she would probably laugh, and he'd tell her it was stranger than he'd expected, and she'd ask why. And he'd try to explain, and he'd probably not explain it properly. And she'd say Dad in that way she had, the way that meant she understood more than he'd said, which was the best thing about his daughter, the single best thing. They came out through the garden. The garden was not something Daniel had known from the inside, either. Not in this way, not walking through it as someone who was meant to be looking at it. He'd crossed it on duty. He'd seen its perimeter from various windows. He'd never stood in it and looked back at the palace the way visitors did, the way Marcus was doing now, phone up again, getting the shot. He stood in the garden and turned around. The palace from this angle. The back of it. Not the famous front with the gates and the balcony. The garden-facing side, quieter, longer, the windows regular and tall, and the stonework the particular color of old London stone, which is not quite white and not quite gray, but something in between, something that absorbs the light differently depending on the hour. He never looked at it from here. 31 years. Every working day. And he never stood in this garden and looked back at the building and thought, I work in there. That is my place of work. That is where I have spent my life. The sky behind it was doing something. He couldn't name what it was doing exactly. The October light had shifted while they were inside, and the clouds had moved or thinned or rearranged themselves somehow, and the light was coming through at an angle that caught the upper windows of the palace and turned them gold briefly for just a moment before the clouds shifted again, and they went back to the color of the afternoon. He stood there and watched it. He didn't photograph it. Some things you don't photograph. Some things you just let happen to you. They got sandwiches from a cafe near St. James's Park. Marcus got tuna. Daniel got egg and cress, which was not something he would normally get. He was a ham man, reliably, habitually, without particular enthusiasm, but the egg and cress was listed first on the board, and he was in a day of first now, and the logic felt sound. They sat on a bench facing the lake. The lake was doing what London lakes do in October, which is be gunmetal gray and somehow beautiful about it. The way certain melancholy things are beautiful precisely because of their melancholy. Ducks sat on the water without urgency. A jogger went past. 2 tourists from somewhere warm were taking a photograph of a squirrel that had come astonishingly close to them on the path, and the squirrel was sitting on its haunches with the expression of an animal that has learned that proximity to humans is a food transaction and is patiently waiting for its side of the deal. Daniel ate his sandwich. Tell me something, Marcus said. If you could go back to the first day, the very first day you worked there. He nodded in the direction of the palace. Not visible from here, but present, the way a very large thing is present even when you can't see it. What would you do differently? Daniel thought about this. I look up, he said. The ceiling, the windows, the paintings. He paused. Everything I walked past. Just look at it, Daniel said. Just register that it was there. That's all. You don't need to stop work. You don't need to become a tourist in your own job. Just look up once a day and notice something. That's all it would have taken. Marcus nodded. He ate his tuna sandwich. The squirrel, having successfully extracted a crisp from the tourists, retreated to a tree with the energy of someone who has successfully completed a business negotiation. My father would say you did your job well, Marcus said. That matters too. It does, Daniel said. I did. I'm not saying it was wasted. It wasn't. It's just. He stopped. Just what? I was in a remarkable place, he said, and I treated it like it was ordinary because I was afraid that if I didn't, I wouldn't be able to do the work. He'd never said this before. He hadn't known it was true until he said it. Marcus was quiet. Do you think that's what it was? Daniel said. Fear, I think. Marcus said carefully, choosing his words with the specific air of a young man speaking to someone twice his age about something real, that you were trying to survive it. the weight of it. And survival sometimes looks like not looking. The lake was gray. A duck went somewhere. Yes, Daniel said. That's probably what it was. He called Priya on Sunday. He always called Priya on Sunday. This Sunday was different in the way that certain Sundays are different when something has happened in the week that has rearranged things inside you. When you come to the phone carrying the rearrangement and hoping the other person is the kind of person who notices. Priya was that kind of person. You sound different, she said for minutes in. I went to the palace yesterday, he said. As a visitor. Silence. Then, as a what? As a visitor. With Marcus. We bought tickets. Dad. She said it in the way. Why? He wanted to go, Daniel said. And he stopped. Started again. I realized I'd never done it. Gone in as a visitor. So I did. And it was extraordinary, he said. It was completely extraordinary, and I've been inside it every working day for 30 years, and I knew that. I knew it was extraordinary. I just hadn't felt it, Priya said. Hadn't felt it, he agreed. He could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. His daughter, 31 years old, who was extraordinary herself, who he had watched grow from something very small into a person who could hear what he wasn't saying. I have the same job, she said. What do you mean? I mean, she paused. I've lived in Edinburgh for 6 years. I've walked past the castle every day, basically on my way to work. I've never been in. I always think I'll go when someone visits. I'll go when there's a reason. There doesn't need to be a reason, Daniel said. That's the thing I learned yesterday. There doesn't need to be a reason. The reason is that it's there, and it's remarkable, and you're there, and He stopped. Alive, Priya said, very quietly. Alive, he said. Yes. A long pause. I'm going on Saturday, she said. Edinburgh Castle. Ticket and everything. Good girl. Don't call me good girl, Dad. I'm 31. Good woman, he said. Saudi. She laughed. Monday morning. Staff entrance. Badge through the reader. The security officer on the door, a man named Ted who Daniel had known for 11 years and had never had a conversation with that lasted more than 45 seconds, said, "Morning, Daniel," and Daniel said, "Morning, Ted," and went through. The corridor, the familiar smell, old wood, and the faint metallic thing that Daniel had decided, walking through on Saturday, was probably some combination of the heating system and the age of the stone, a smell that was specific to this building and no other building on earth, a smell that had entered his lungs every working day for 31 years. He stopped. Ted looked over. All right. Yes, Daniel said. Phoenix. He was looking at the ceiling. It was the corridor ceiling, not one of the grand ceilings, not a chandelier or a painted scene or any of the things that made visitors tip their heads back and say, oh. It was a working corridor. Functional. The ceiling was high and white and corniced in a way that would have been considered ornate in any other building in London and was considered mundane here by virtue of being a corridor. It was not mundane. He'd just forgotten. He stood there for another 5 seconds and looked at it. Just that. Just the ceiling of a corridor, just the coving and the height and the particular quality of morning light coming from the window at the far end, the light moving along the floor. Then he walked on. He had work to do. There was always work to do. The work was real, and it mattered, and he was good at it, and none of that had changed. But he looked up now. He looked up at the things he walked past. He looked at them the way Saturday had taught him to look, not with the performed wonder of a tourist, not with the overcompensating attention of a man trying to make up for lost time, just with the ordinary noticing of someone who has decided that noticing is a thing worth doing. The Rembrandt. He went past it on the way to a meeting in the East Wing, and he paused for 10 seconds. Just 10. He looked at the man in the dark coat, the thick paint, the brush strokes. 4001. There was a school group in the East Corridor around 11:30. Daniel didn't supervise school groups. That was a different team, but he passed through the corridor while they were in it. A class of 11-year-olds from somewhere in the Midlands by the sound of the accents. The teacher doing the slightly strangled voice that teachers do when they're managing 25 children in a place where the rule is do not touch anything. One boy at the back of the group had stopped. He was looking at a painting Daniel knew well. A landscape, Dutch 17th century, rolling hills, and a sky full of the kind of dramatic cloud that Dutch painters had a particular talent for. All that light and shadow. The boy was standing still in a way that 11-year-old boys very rarely stand still, with his hand behind his back in an unconscious mirroring of the formal visiting posture, just looking. The group moved forward. The boy didn't. The teacher noticed a moment later. Owen, keep up. Owen, presumably, did not keep up immediately. He held for another 3 seconds, Daniel counted, and then he turned and caught up with the group, not running, just walking quickly, and as he passed Daniel, he looked up with the expression of someone who has just been somewhere and is still partly there. Daniel thought about himself at 11. He'd been to London twice as a child, both times to visit a relative in Lewisham, neither time anywhere near the palace. He'd seen the gates through a bus window once, he thought, or maybe he'd imagined that. Memory was unreliable on the subject of bus windows. He'd never imagined, at 11, that he'd spend his adult life inside the place. He'd never thought it was possible. He hadn't had Marcus's mother's tea towel drawer, hadn't had anyone telling him that remarkable things were accessible, that you could simply go, that the world had more rooms in it than the ones you were shown by default. He thought, I hope Owen comes back, not on a school trip with 24 other children and a teacher counting heads. On his own terms. Well, he decides to. He went back on a Tuesday, 3 weeks later. Not with Marcus. Alone. He bought a ticket online the night before, the way Marcus had shown him, and he printed it out. Or rather, he put on his phone because he didn't print things anymore, apparently, which was a development Daniel had accepted with the grumbling tolerance he applied to most developments. And he went in through the visitor entrance on a Tuesday morning in November when the crowds were thinner, and the light through the windows had the particular quality of November light, which is something. Other than October light, lower and more specific, the kind of light that has decided exactly where it wants to be. He went to the throne room first. He stood in it for 11 minutes. He did not photograph it. He stood in it and looked at the canopy and the thrones and the walls and the ceiling and the floor, all of it, the whole room, and he tried to hold it all at once the way you sometimes try to hold all of the piece of music at once, and mostly can't. He thought about the people who had stood here before him. Not the kings, not the ceremony, the cleaners, the footmen, the staff of previous generations going back as far as the building itself. All the anonymous labor of maintenance and care and invisible effort that had kept this room extraordinary while it waited for the next extraordinary thing to happen in it. His people, his predecessors, he felt, and this was strange, and he held it carefully. He felt part of something, not the official thing, not the institution, something longer and quieter than that. A thread of ordinary human beings who had walked through extraordinary rooms every day and mostly kept their heads down and gone home to their flats in Pimlico or the equivalent and called their daughters on Sundays and had lower backs. He felt less alone in a way he couldn't explain and didn't try to. He went through the staterooms in order. He stopped for the Rembrandt again. He sat on a bench in the garden. It was cold. November. The bench was damp, he said anyway, and he looked back at the palace. The garden was bare in November. The trees had gone over. The sky was white, and even in the palace stood in it, the long back of it, the windows and the stone, patient and indifferent and enduring the way only buildings that have been standing for 300 years can endure things. He bought a tea towel on the way out. Not for Priya this time. For himself. He put in a drawer at home and forgot about it, mostly. But sometimes on a Sunday morning, getting things out of the drawer, he'd come across it. The palace on it, the stylized illustration, the gates and the flags, and the Victoria Memorial just at the edge of the frame. And he'd look at it for a moment before putting it back. Just a moment. Just noticing. He retired 2 years later. The leaving do was held in a room he'd been in 10,000 times by people he'd worked beside for decades, with a cake that was slightly too sweet and speeches that were kind and accurate in the way that leaving speeches are kind and accurate, which is to say partially. What they said was true. He'd been good at his work. He'd been reliable. He'd cared about the place. What they didn't say, couldn't have said, wasn't the kind of thing, was that the last 2 years had been different. That he'd started pointing things out to new staff, quietly on corridor walks, saying, look at that the way someone who has learned to look says, look at that. not showing off, just sharing. That he'd started the habit of 1 minute a day in whatever room he was in, just looking at the ceiling. That he'd bought himself a book about Dutch landscape painting, 17th century, which was still on his bedside table. Nobody said any of that. He said goodbye. He walked out the staff entrance for the last time. He stood outside on the pavement in the February afternoon and turned around. He looked at it. 33 years. He looked at it for a long time. Then he turned up his collar against the cold and walked toward the bus stop, and the bus came, and he got on it, and he sat by the window and watched London go past, all of it still extraordinary, all of it still there. Priya called him the following Sunday. "How does it feel?" she said. "Being retired?" "Strange," he said. "Like the first day somewhere. Like you're looking at everything for the first time." "Is that good?" He watched a pigeon land on the windowsill outside his flat and sit there with complete pigeon authority. "Yes," he said. "That's very good. I went to the castle again last week," she said. "Edinburgh. By myself this time. Third time now. And I noticed something new," she said. "Every time I go, I notice something I didn't see before." He smiled. The pigeons stayed. "That's how it works," he said. "You don't run out. The thing about remarkable places is that they do not require you to be ready. They are ready. They are always ready. The only question, is whether you will show up as someone who is looking." Daniel Ashworth spent 31 years learning the answer. He spent the rest of his life living it.